Craft beer. I do really like craft beer. Many, many years ago, I think, when I was just starting out in alcohol, drinking alcohol, we only had Bud or Coors. I mean, there was very little beer. So what do we just call beer? And then one day, um, some new brewery came out, some called Samuel Adams, and they released their first beer, and they called themselves a microbrewery. And I drank it first time, and I thought, my God, beer actually can taste good. Because to that point, you were always told that beer tastes like crap, but that's just how you have to get through that. And once you get through that and become used to drinking it and actually start to like it, that's sort of brings you to the adult. That's adulthood. That was one of your rite of passage, when it comes to alcohol. And for a long time, I kind of had doubts about that, because why would you want to drink something that bad, pay money for it, and call that good and call that fun? And I just couldn't get around to figuring that out. And then, a few years later, I see this thing called IPA, and I thought, what the heck is an IPA? I'll just try it anyway. And I thought, wow, what is this? This doesn't taste like anything like the beer I know. Um, so there was that, and then I went to London, several years after that, and I went to a pub, and there was just tons of beer I didn't know, and I said, I'll just have an ale. I don't know what ale means, but I'll just have one, and it just tasted so good. And it's like, what is this? And I think that's where I kind of got the where that thinking just kind of grew and grew and grew. And then several years ago in Japan, um, there is a place called Tap Room, which Bard's Brewery, which is the brewery in Numazu, Shizuoka. One of the first, if not the first, foreign breweries. Up until that point, Japan only had Asahi, Kirin, and Sapporo. And those are the three beers that were allowed to brew alcohol, or brew beer. No one else could. You actually needed a license to actually do it. It was illegal to do it on your own. Um, I had some of that stuff, and I thought, my God, this is it. This has got to be the thing that I've been looking for. I tried different things. I tried wine. I got into wine for a while. I would not take the sommelier thing, but understand taste, understand what the difference between red and white is, different types. I got tired of it. Went to whiskey, same thing. Went to shochu, awamori, went back to whiskey, but I just couldn't. Nothing stuck really. Like I just got tired of just tasting, because they all kind of tasted the same thing. After a while, things were so close, because the ingredients that they made from all this stuff, they're very close. I mean, it might be just a type of, for example, wine. It might be the type of grape, but it's still grapes. You're just always drinking grapes. I thought there's got to be, I don't know. A few years ago, I can't remember how or where, but I just started just watching people, or seeing on the internet, people calling something craft beer, and all these different types of beer. Sort of, these microbrewers are making these great beers, and I went around trying to look for a place. For whatever reason, several years ago in Tokyo, there wasn't really so many brewery bars or craft beer bars, so to speak, but they were around, and I was lucky enough to find one next to my house. So I went there, and that master had a really nice selection, and that's where I think my love of, well, I shouldn't say my love, but my discovery of how much of a thing it is, I guess, and the availability of it, and how it's changing sort of the way people look at alcohol and drinking in general. Um, So that over the last year and a half, I've been going to different places and meeting people and talking to people about craft beer. And it's amazing the stuff that the people that you talk to. I've met um, brewers. I've met guys who distribute. I've met people who just love beer. It's great. We walk into a bar, I'm almost guaranteed to make a friend. It's great. It's a strange thing to think, but um, and so I talk to a lot of people, and what about beer that they really like, and they just like something that tastes good. Um, and that's what kind of got me like, well, there's got to, I don't see why people, I I guess the things that always have bothered me about this is people still stick to the creating and stuff, which don't taste as good. But then, and for a long time I couldn't figure it out. After about a year or so, I started to figure out. I mean, just on my own, sort of. I'm sure if I just asked somebody, I could get the answer. But I wanted to do it on my own. I wanted to find the answer on my own. Um, and it was really just people have a hard time drinking things that are bitter. Really, I think the first thing, and craft beer in particular, well, beer in general is made of two different kinds of yeast. That's where people look at it. So you have lagers and you have ales. So ales, well, let me start. Lagers are the stuff that people are used to drinking. So all of the Budweisers, the Coors, that 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 beer, it's a clean tasting, very, it's the carbonation's a lot bit higher. Um, they taste good cold, um, easy to drink, and people just like that. And I get that. When you look at ales, ales are actually they tend to be more fruity or more bitter. They're definitely harder to drink, um, and people really have a lot of different ways of creating ales, like the IPA, for example. Um, so, and they're heavy. They're definitely heavy. They're not they're not they're not brewed. They're actually brewed a little bit on a warmer temperature than lagers are. So that's why you don't have ales. You don't drink it at such a cold temperature. You actually have to drink them slightly warmer. Um, like a Guinness, where you drink at room temperature. It's kind of that same thing. You also have a lot different hops. Well, I guess the other thing, hops are what give beer its flavor. In a lager, you have certain hops, but you tend to be very limited on the type of hops that you use. Where on an ale, you have so many different types of hops that are used to give you so many different kinds of flavor. Everything from that bitter flavor that people think of as with to very sweet, fruity, citrus. There's all these sort of different flavors that you get out of the beer that I never thought you could get, but that's what an ale does, or what an ale can give you, and it's all really due to the hops and the way the beer is brewed. I think with a lot of the other alcohols like wine or whiskey, time is usually the thing that hurts them the most, because you're talking about something that takes years to create. Beer usually takes between 4 months, 3, 4 months, and you can get a nice batch of beer. Um, but you can do that over and over again, and you can change the way you brew it. There, you can have different techniques, different ways of doing things, and you can find your right beer. And it's very easy to make. Anybody can do it. Very accessible, really. I mean, I don't think you can go out and make wine. Right? It's very hard to go out and make whiskey, but anyone can go out and make beer. And I just that in and of itself is something I really love about beer. It's I to me I call it the craft, because it's a craft that everyone can do. Very few people do it well, but the people who do it, I give them credit for, because it's just amazing. There's so much within the process that you have to do to actually create a great beer, and it's so easy to make a terrible beer. But it's that journey that most brewers have to go through to do it. And for all of the craft beer brewers out there, they've all gone through that, and they've all made their beer, and they've been able to share that with us. And for each beer, there's a story. Each beer has its what happened, how it got made, what the brewer was thinking when he made it, and there's there's a lot of history in that beer, and it's great to hear that. Um, I'm sure whiskey and wine and other have that history as well, but I think the history tends to be more about the company itself. Where I see beer has a history within itself as a brewer, but it also has history within the beer itself. Each beer has its own history. Each beer has its own story to tell. That's something I love listening to. So as far as a explanation of why I like beer, why I like craft beer, what is it about craft beer that makes me go crazy every time I hear it is really that. It's um, the stories, the it beer is something that everyone can access. It's anyone can drink it, anyone can make it, anyone can create it, anyone can you have that so much access to it, and you have brewers that would love to talk to you about it. You can ask them about how they make it. You can ask them what they do. They will share their secrets with you. They'll do everything to keep that craft going along. And for most people, they'll talk to you for hours. People who like beer tend to be, for me anyway, tend to be some of the friendliest people I know. I've made so many friends just walking into a craft beer bar. It's crazy. The minute you just say I like craft beer, male or female, you've made a friend. You talk about that for hours, and it's great. You don't get sort of weird looks if you're a foreigner or whatever. It's just you like beer, great. Let's talk about beer. Let's what kind of beer do you like? And it just it's it's been a great thing for me to experience, and it's something I would love others to experience as well. It's a thing that you don't find in other alcohols or other drinks, cocktails, shochu, whatever. Each drink has its own culture, but I think beer's culture, as old as it is, has still kept you know its familiarity and its access and its you know and its flavors. There's some certain flavors I just don't like. There's just certain kinds of beer I don't like. Sours, for example, have become quite trendy in the last year or two, and sours are those are the fruity beers, like the ciders, but they're not sweet as cider. They're sours. So they tend to drift more towards that beer flavor, but with fruits. And I just never tasted one that got me excited. They all taste kind of the same, and they're not very exciting for me. So that would be something where tons of people would like it, but for me personally, I just don't find it interesting. There's other beers like that people would say. I know people. I love IPAs, but there are people who just don't like IPAs, who don't understand why people drink IPAs. So there's that as well. It's hard to pinpoint or put a definition to that. It's just difficult. The big boom really happened while I was living here, so I would take them to Ushitora in Shimokitazawa. That's bar none. It's one of the best beers I've ever had. They make all kinds of beer, and really depending on their taste, I would probably they make a beer called Heat Wave IPA, which is amazing. It's a nice fruity IPA that still has its strong bitterness on the back of it, and it's a great beer. And for Japan, that is one of the better beers out there. So as far as a brewery, Uchisora has been around for a good 10-15 years now. They actually the brewery is actually in Tochigi, and the bars are in Shimokitazawa. And year after year, they make great beer. They just do it. And the shacho there is just great guy. Loves his product, loves his business, thinks nothing about himself. He only thinks I guess clients, customers, and also his staff, and does everything for them. And you see that in every beer that he makes. It's just everything from the naming to the way they make the beer. There's a beer that he makes. It's called One More Pint, and they call it a saison IPA, fruity IPA, which it's a little bit on the I guess citrusy, fruity side. A saison IPA, if you don't know, is an IPA with a low alcohol level, so they tend to be usually in the 3, 4, or 5% range. Holding back on an alcohol level sort of limits your how you brew your beer, because usually the more alcohol level, or the more you put hops and things in it, the higher the alcohol level goes. So anyway, this beer he's made for his 10th anniversary. Oh, I'm sorry, 13th anniversary of his bar in Shimokizawa. And two things got me on this beer that just I thought was amazing. So the first thing is, when making this beer, he called all of his regulars to the bar, and he asked that the beer, actually, when you drink it, tastes like grapefruits. It tastes like a grapefruit juice. And what he did was he had all of his regulars come to the bar one day, and they all squeezed grapefruit juice. So all that grapefruit juice was all squeezed by the customers, the regulars. Amazing. That, to me, that in and of itself is being able to have your customers share in the experience of creating a beer that everyone's going to drink. Second thing is, and I asked him this, I thought, well, why did you choose to use a saison? Because a saison holds you back from doing more things with your beer. And he looked at me, he's like, that's a good question. He goes, for this year's anniversary is a 13-year anniversary, so we're going to be having a celebration for 13 days. And usually during a celebration period, people will buy our staff beers. That's just what you do. So our staff is going to be probably drinking a lot of beer. Our customers will probably be drinking a lot of beer. And we don't want to get our staff drunk along with our customers. We want to be able to take care of our customers. So I made a saison to make sure that my customers, as well as my staff, didn't get too drunk. But also, they were able to have one more pint. That's what I love about it's what he thought. It's all in his way of thinking of why he wants to make this beer, how he wants to want to make that beer, and it just things like that just amaze me. I love listening to that stuff. The chances are that you're probably the only person that likes craft beer. Everyone else probably doesn't like craft beer. That's a very normal thing that happens. And so what most people do, or what you'll find, and I'm one of these people, is if you have so your friends call you on Friday and go, okay, dude, we're going to be at this place. We'll meet at like 7:00. Okay, cool. So let's say, I don't know, let's say we're going to Shibuya to make things simple. Okay, meet at this izakaya in Shibuya at 7:00. Okay, great. I will go to Shibuya at about 6:30, look for a craft beer place and drink one nice craft beer before I go to the izakaya, because the izakaya I know won't have craft beer. So I usually go to craft beers, I usually go to these bars by myself. You'll find that most people do that, where most of their friends don't like craft beer, so they'll go by themselves. And that's not just for men, that's actually for women. So you'll find that a lot of women go to these bars by themselves because they know, number one, probably they're not going to get picked up because everyone's just there by themselves anyway. And number two, everyone just really likes to drink beer, not much else. So you start to find people just sort of go to these craft bars because they can find the beer that they want to drink. And the people will find excuses to go, whether it's usually it's on their own. And so because you're in a bar with people who are there by themselves and drinking and enjoying the thing that they like to do, it just sort of creates an atmosphere for people to talk. Oh, you're drinking that beer. How's that taste? And it sort of kind of goes on from there. I think beer in the past was just sort of like a party experience where it wasn't about the beer. It was just more about people getting together, like beer, football game, beer, party, beer. Like it was attached to something else. With craft beer, it's not really attached to anything. It's more attached to having a chance to drink one rather than it being part of a social event or part of social party or something like that. I think that's what makes craft beer, and especially 'cause craft beer, the part of the definition of a craft beer is small, like a microbrewery. So Budweiser would never be a craft beer. They can make beers that are like craft beers. Kidding does that, where they make something and they call it craft beer to try to imitate that. But you're right in the fact that most of the beers in a craft market, in a craft market, a craft beer sort of market, it's very easy to meet the guy who makes it. It's very easy to meet like the president of the company, for example. I've met so Ushitoro. I know the president. He's the guy that makes the beer. I can say hi to him. I can tell him that beer sucked, and he'll tell me why. He'll ask me why. He's a really great guy. I can go to a distributor called AQ Beverage, and I can talk to the president there, and I can tell him, dude, got to get this beer in, and he can tell me why he won't get that beer in, for example. So Maui Brewing is one of the bigger brewer, is probably the biggest brewer in Hawaii. Guy named Garrett, and he came to Japan on like a tour thing, and they had little events and to meet him, and I met him. Great guy, like just so friendly. I talked to him about. Actually, I talked to him more about Hawaii than beer because he was kind of like getting tired of Japan and its craziness, and he just wanted to talk to like Hawaiian people. But really, he's just talking. He's like, "Oh yeah, dude, you got to come to the brewery. Give me a call. I'll take you around." And he's the president of the company. But these guys will do that. I mean, going back to the Ushitora, I've had these 2-hour conversations with him about beer, about his beer in particular, and they're more than happy to talk about it. If you read craft beer, like articles on craft beer, most breweries will give you a tour or have tours, and most breweries want you to ask questions. They want you to, learn more about their beer, know more, and they want to challenge. They also want to be challenged. So it's great that you can do that in a craft beer environment where it's something you can't do, in a Bud or a Kirin, or they just, it's not, it hasn't hit that corporate level, I guess. But there is a thing about being an independent, which is kind of a thing now in the US, where there's a little mark that says independent brewery, and that's something that they've been trying to push for because they don't want it to make it look like they're a part of anybody. They do the beer because they like it and they care about it, and that's where the difference ends, or that's where the line begins or ends, I guess. But I guess the thing about craft beer is just the type of beer that is available just is amazing. The beer that still kind of freaks me out are the dessert beers. Yeah, so the beers that have like chocolate, or there's a Napoleon beer. There's a lot of beers that just don't taste like beer. Like, I'm not sure why, but that's just the way they make them. But to me, that's amazing. Beer that doesn't taste like beer, they still call it beer. They have to because of the way they're made, But chocolate beer, I can't remember someone thinking, yeah, chocolate and beer, that's a perfect match. I still can't really, But for me, that would probably be my big surprise. Especially for sweet beers like those chocolate beers, I would only drink them if that was my last beer. If that was my first beer, I probably wouldn't drink it. Beer was always looked at as kind of the poor man's drink. Wine, cocktails, that tends to be looked upon as slightly more middle class, well-to-do drinks. But beer nowadays really isn't that sort of cheapy Coors Light thing that most people will imagine. That beer now is, such a different thing. I mean, you can, like, by going back, you can drink chocolate beers now. You can drink beers that have different flavors, and they actually cost more. Beer now actually costs a lot more expensive than a lot of wines these days. So a glass of wine that may cost you $6 or $7, well, a glass of beer will actually cost you $10 to $15, depending on what you're drinking. So beer has definitely lost well, it still has its cheap or more inexpensive side, but it has a different side to it as well. It's not the same one thing anymore. I'm not sure how, I guess most of the times, if anybody would ever come and criticize me of beer, I would probably give them a small lesson on what craft beer is like now as compared to what they think beer is. So, like, people tend to have wine for things, and it just seems like I don't know. It always felt it could be just me. It could be me, but it always felt sort of a class sort of related issue. I think what the beer does really is it gives people a thing to talk about. Is where I noticed it the most. Where in the past, I'm drinking Bud, you're drinking Bud. That there's no sort of conversation material there that you can talk. So, so what are you doing tonight? Who are your friends? It sort of becomes that. But with with beer, or I guess with craft beer, since you have so many different kinds of beers, and usually if you're at a craft beer place, you usually have some interest in what other people are drinking. If you've never tried that beer before, or why people are drinking that beer, and so that what are you drinking? That question tends to be the material, or sort of the icebreaker, if you will, for people to actually come together and talk about beer. Sometimes it requires someone to kind of go, oh hey, you're drinking that. What maybe someone a little bit braver to break that ice. But I think in general, using beer as the material or the thing to start a conversation with, it's really helped for me in particular. To make friends, I say acquaintances, whatever you want to call it, and just start conversations with people that way. I would probably start them with something sweet. There's a lot of sweet beers that people would go, this is a beer, but I would probably start them with something like that. Or there is a beer called a golden ale, which is very light. It's an ale. It tastes like beer, but it's very light. It's kind of like it's kind of what a lager would taste like if we put ale in it. I guess is the only way I can describe it. It's nice and crisp, easy to drink. So depending on the person, if they really don't like that bitter taste, I would probably look for something a bit sweeter. If it's someone who kind of is okay with that sort of beery taste, and I would go with something like a golden ale to start. So here's where my beer snob comes in. I will pull my beer snob card here. So before I drink, I'm got a lot on my mind. I've got work, I've got family, I've got bills, I don't know, whatever. You're normal. I've got a lot of stuff on my mind. When I drink a craft beer, I have a way of drinking it. So the first thing I will do is look at it. I'll look at the color of the beer. So depending on what kind of beer I'm drinking, it gives me an idea of what it is that it's going to taste like. Second thing I do is I smell it, like you do it with wine. Check the nose, see what it smells like. That will also give you an idea of what's coming next, and then I drink it. In that whole process, it kind of helps me to sort of stop everything and concentrate on just one thing. And so I forget lots of all of that stuff I just, that I was just thinking about. And after my first sip of beer, I'm pretty calm after that, where I'm not actually thinking about, all the stresses of the day. I'm just thinking about that beer in front of me. So that's how I end it. That's, after that first sip, that's where I am. Yeah, I think that's my own. Right now, it's kind of the only way to help me focus on the now. I don't think anything of it, to tell you the truth. I think that's a very normal thing to do. Call it your bud. Hey, I'm going to go get a beer. You want to go grab one? I don't actually see anything wrong with it or unusual. It's very, very day-to-day normal thing. It's probably different, but I think guys just need to hang out with guys. I think that's just a thing where, I think to a certain degree, guys need other guys to relax. I don't know if um, when guys hang out with girls, there's always a little bit of tension in the air, just because you sort of have to be careful what you're doing. You don't, you know. But when you're guys, you tend to, like the way girls are when they're with other, they can say whatever they want and be sort of however they want to be. Where guys are kind of the same thing, where if there's just guys, you know. And I think a long time ago, um, having a beer with a friend is kind of like, well, my one of the things I actually remember the most is when my dad took me to get my first beer when I turned 21. For me, that was a big moment. That was like, okay, now I'm finally, I'm there. That's, you know, I can drink now. I can drink with my pops, and that's, you know. So I think that's where a lot of that comes from. Where, you know, you kind of want to, that beer is the thing. Well, we're talking about beer, but beer tends to be the thing that kind of connects that, I guess. You know, people, guys always, you know, guys who are trying to be guys will usually look to something to make themselves more manly. And so, hey dude, you want to go get some French food? It doesn't really work, you know. But if you say, hey dude, let's go get a beer, or, you know, to get something to drink, I think has a better feel for it. But I don't really, you know, there are guys that go, oh, let's go get a bottle of wine. There is that, but I think for me and for my generation, or not generation, but just the people around me, I probably get slapped if they, hey, let's go get a bottle of wine. They'd probably slap me or wonder what's wrong. That's kind of how I get to, you know. So, well, bonding, yeah, definitely bonding. It's a continuation of bonding. I mean, you know, beer helps bonding. It helps people kind of get together. I mean, it helps you relax. You know, after your first beer, you sort of, a lot of that tensions kind of goes away, and so you're able to, you know, relax and have that conversation that you probably need to have or want to have. That's hard only because there are so many breweries in Japan, and there's, in each prefecture they have, you know, its own sort of craft beer culture that I can't really center it on one place. Um, People will say Tokyo only because there's a lot of people in Tokyo, but you can say the same thing for Osaka. You can say the same thing for Kyushu. Not Kyushu, I'm sorry, Kyoto. You could say the same thing for, like the Tokaido area, or not the Tohoku area. It's hard. It's a little bit different. Okinawa has a lot of breweries as well, so it's hard to really pinpoint the one. That is hard because that was more about the brewery, not really the culture itself. It's, you know, it's, IPAs will always sort of be popular, I think, in a general sense. Although there's a lot of other beers coming around, it's hard to really pinpoint the one. Though it really is. Japan, in the past, Japan had their microbrewery boom, like 30 years ago or so, and they call it jibiru. Um, so they've had this sort of thing before, but back in that time, to them, jibiru just meant small company. It didn't really mean like what we know as craft beer today. They would, you still use the same. They would make the same pilsner, but it wouldn't be like a pilsner. They might put fruit in it, or, but it's still a pilsner. You know, it's still a lager. So, um, the Japanese way of thinking about the beers tend to be the same where you go. For example, I had a shoot in Osaka, so after I was done, I went to as I will do, went to a craft beer place in Osaka. Same sort of style of beer, same ways of thinking. They have access to different beers, so I got to try things that, yeah, you can't try here normally, but it's still the same idea. The culture, the bars are tight. They know each other. You know, there's, everyone kind of knows each other. There's a bit of that helping feeling. I can't imagine it being different. I think there's a group of people who just got tired of drinking crap beer. That is my, people think that there were people that just didn't accept what they were drinking and wanted to try something different, and knew that they only had these three big, well, you know, Kirin, Sapporo, Asahi, that they only had a very limited amount of beer, but they wanted something better, and that's what brought that. Everything from barge to different distributors and whatnot, they've all sort of contributed a little bit to that. So it's hard to say it was one. It's hard to say it was one thing that sort of led to it. It was a lot of different little things. I think that right now it would be Ushitora. They are not the best brewery, but they challenge themselves all the time. Um, they very much think about what they're putting out, and they very much challenge not just well, they'll challenge their customers, and they challenge themselves. And I love that. There's another brewery called Shiga Kogen, which bar none makes the best beer all the single time, and people just love the stuff that they come out with, and they do create one of the best beers in Japan. But I think Ushitora has definitely put out a great selection of beer, and they really challenge people to think about the beer that they're drinking, and you know, and they're always welcome to have people go, I don't like that beer, and it's great. I thought that in and of itself is for them makes them one of the better breweries in Japan. Not every beer that comes out is meant to is really the best beer. Do you know Arrogant Bastard? Do you know the story behind Arrogant Bastard? Arrogant Bastard was actually a failure. It was a beer that they made that actually was supposed to be discarded because it wasn't. People drank it. This is crazy. This tastes like crap. Why would you put this out? This is like they made a mistake in the brewing process. And the person goes, no. He goes, try it again. He goes, look, this challenge everyone. And so they call it Arrogant Bastard. And they challenge people like, yeah, we'll put this out. Drink it. This is us. This is the way we roll. And they put it out. And people drank it and thought, what the this tastes weird, but okay. Arrogant Bastard. Okay, that's kind of funny. And they created a beer from it, But yeah, it's a failed beer by trade. Drink it. Well, if you ever try it, drink it. You'll notice that it doesn't taste as good as you think it's supposed to. But you sort of let it go because, well, it's a funny beer. I mean, it's a funny attitude to have for a beer that really makes bad beer. That is more just how the brewery would think. There's a lot of basis on the way they think about names, and it's always sort of different depending on who you talk to. And so it may not necessarily depend on how they make the beer, but I think in general they tend to think of or try to think of original names just to get a laugh or get people to turn and drink their beer. So pure happiness. I'm in a place where I'm drinking my favorite beer. What more would I need? I don't need anything else. Actually, that's all I ever ask. That's all I ever want. Really, tastes good. It's beer that tastes good. I can't explain it any more than that. That's all it is. Happiness, because I'm drinking craft beer, and for me, drinking craft beer is all I want. It's the thing that makes me happy. I don't need anything else.